We've got monetization strategies beyond the app stores for 2022. We've got a 40-minute fireside now with Miikka Luotio from Xsolla and Robin Squire from BlackBlock. Please give it up for those guys.
It's amazing to be in a conference again in person, so I'm a little bit nervous because normally just talking through Zoom, but this time a big audience, so it's great, it's exciting. Thank you all for coming, and today what we're going to talk about today is monetization beyond the app stores in the future, talking about mobile game commerce that exists outside of the platforms, NFTs, blockchain, play-to-earn commerce, and I have here today, together from a developer perspective with Robin, and then from my point of view more at Xsolla, where we operate as a merchant of record for video game companies. So first, maybe Robin, you can do a quick introduction of who you are and what you do, and yeah.
Thanks, Miikka. So hey everyone, my name's Robin Squire. So I've been in the games industry for just over 10 years now. Previously used to work at pretty well-known companies such as Luotio, who make Angry Birds, and PlayRaven, who were later acquired by Luotio. And I'm the CEO of a Helsinki-based game development studio called BlackBlock. And with BlackBlock, our mission has always been to build sort of persistent open worlds. As a team, we've been looking at that for 5 years now. We've been a company for 3, but the team and I have been working on similar stuff before that. And I guess now the kinds of experiences you could say we're working on are kind of metaverse-like experiences, you know, open shared worlds, large amounts of players, persistency. So we've been looking at that for a while now, previously looking at it from the perspective of mobile free-to-play, but also now looking at it from the Web3 perspective and how it kind of maps to blockchain play-to-earn NFTs and whatnot. So
very cool.
Great to be here.
Thank you. So a quick introduction. So I'm Miikka, Regional Director for Europe for Xsolla. So I've worked in the mobile industry for 16 years and 1.5 years ago joined Xsolla. And we're basically looking after our partners here, mobile publishers, PC, online games. And Xsolla, we operate with a global network of partners such as anything from Twitch to Roblox to Fortnite. We empower enterprise companies to indie mid-tier companies to basically sell in-game purchases and their premium games to them. And I'm here to talk about specifically some of the topics that are really rotating right now, like mobile game commerce in the payment space is evolving faster than ever before, with the topics floating, such as monetizing beyond the app stores. How do you do that? Is it okay to do that? What do the platforms think? What's happening in that whole space? Namely, Apple versus Epic. Everybody's heard about it by now, even your grandma, your mom, your dad. It's been on the big news. So a little bit about that as well. Blockchain, NFTs, and play-to-earn projects, cloud gaming. All of that has significant impact to publishers and developers in terms of how they sell in-game goods. And how they accept payments from players around the world, and where those payments are going, I think is the interesting topic. So, but maybe, Robin, what we're going to do is ask each other some questions to get perspective. So, if you will, Robin.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess you mentioned Apple versus Epic and kind of the stuff happening there on the third-party payment side. So maybe now's a good time to talk about what the sort of state of play is in the wake of those developments on the third-party payment side for the developers.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think the interesting topic regarding that is when we look at what's been happening recently, especially in light of the whole Apple versus Epic thing. We look at 35 US states basically rallying up against Apple and actually bankrolled by Microsoft, believe it or not. So that's interesting. I think in the US, it seems to be a long game. When we look at like Netherlands, they fined Apple for 5 million after they were not happy with the proposal to open up third-party payments for the app stores. And Korea is doing the same. And also in Russia, from what we understand is, in Russia, they're also lobbying to open up the, basically force the platform holders, not just Apple, but all of them, to essentially open up the commerce and the options for publishers to choose and have the freedom of choice.
So if a developer wants to start looking at third-party payments, start integrating new ways for fans and players to pay, what are the sort of key challenges they should be aware of? What are the pitfalls to consider or the things to overcome?
Yeah, I think the key challenge really is going to be, you need to ask yourself, do I own my own customers? Do I own my own players? So you need to own your own customer base. And right now, when you're dependent on platforms, but we see a lot, like you look at different larger publishers, like Supercell ID, publishers have increasingly their own ID system, and through there, they're making offers to their players, and they're essentially offering them virtual goods that transcend multiple games and even franchises, right? And the only way to do that really is to liberate yourself to actually have the freedom of choice as a publisher to control your relationship with the players directly, is to take it outside of mobile. So that's the first step, because also legally speaking, I think the biggest challenge is you need to build an ID system. If you don't have it now, when you want to think about future, that's a great investment to do now, that if you do it now, it will pay off in 5 years, because that gives you not only logistically the liberty to sell whatever you want to your players, wherever, no matter the screen they play in, because that's where it's going. I think when people talk to me about metaverse, for me it's more that a franchise, a game brand, will be accessible and playable in every screen or any screen they want to play, and they can also pay on any screen. And that is going to be the future, whether the platforms want it or not.
I think one thing also from a developer's perspective, I think that can get quite confusing as well, is when these articles come out about sort of Apple and allowing third-party payments and whether they take a cut, like what they actually mean. Do they mean payments within the app, or do they mean payments on a web shop? And I think it might be worth even clarifying the difference there, right? There's two ways of essentially integrating third-party payments, isn't there? You can do it in the app now, or you can point people to a separate web shop.
Yeah. I think there's a few ways that you can already, basically, a lot of publishers that I talk to, they ask, what can I do today? If I look like, okay, I'm waiting for how the Apple versus Epic thing turns out, and everybody should pay attention to the news, but what can you do today is there's been a lot of changes in the guidelines. If you look at the platforms, not just Apple, but Google as well, and even Steam. If you look at the changes that they've implemented, is more leaning towards when you have your user ID system, that's your publisher ID that transcends multiple games. You create a website where players can log in with that ID. Legally speaking, the platforms are more limited to have a say on what you do and what you don't do directly with your customers. So that's something that's important to understand, that when you have a mobile-only game, the platforms really own the players, in a sense. And that's crazy to think about it, but in a sense, that's the case. And I think when you actually are able to transcend your players outside of the stores, how that usually happens is either you make a web version or PC version of your free-to-play mobile game, so going with the mobile-first strategy and then doing cross-platform, so that's obviously a great way. But another more popular way that we are seeing is publishers setting up essentially like a VIP, web shops, gold stores that are essentially selling special offer bundles, usually very high-priced tier bundles, where Apple usually caps the maximum IAP around 50, I think, where if you sell special offer bundles in the web, there's no limit. So you can sell a bundle for $5,000, right? And give way more value, because that's something that you can do. So I see a lot of publishers, at least many of our partners, especially on the mobile side, doing this kind of VIP store, almost like a concierge service for their whales, to allow them to get better deals at higher price points. And these are usually time-limited offers that are rotating on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And the results are great. We've seen some of our partners make more revenue than they make on the mobile SKU, which is on the App Store. So their revenues have exceeded. And these are usually games that are really core games that are driven by that 1% of the whales are doing 90% of the spending. For those type of games, that web shop option, I think, is a great thing to at least explore. and do a proof of concept if nothing else.
Yeah, what are the do you have any examples or case studies you can give of developers that have sort of taken this approach? You mentioned that it's the sort of typically the super fans or the most engaged or the whales, essentially, for lack of a better term, that this resonates with. And you mentioned that it's more sort of core genres. Are there any specific types of games that work really well when they do the web shop with Xsolla?
Yeah, I think also interestingly, if you look at what Supercell did with the Clash of Clans store, they're basically using Supercell ID and they're selling season passes. So I think that's an interesting, like when you have games that have a season pass system, and then you have gifting mechanics so that you can basically gift your friends season passes. So it becomes like you can buy a bundle of 3 and then you can gift them around. I think that's a smart approach. That's a great example, I think. And then another example that one of our partners have done is Scopely is like giving extra value on, for example, WWE Champions. What they've done there, they've essentially created like a special offer bundle store, and it's really well made. They make it very clear to their whales how much extra value they get if they buy those web exclusive bundles. So, and that has kind of snowballed on their case, where the community really like found out about it, and the whole community kind of started doing that bargain hunting, and pretty much they really successfully migrated their whales into a more profitable platform where they control the payment space, they control the coverage of payments. They don't obviously have to pay the so-called platform tax either. So those are, I think, good examples.
And so for developers for the purpose of like developers being aware of this, do they actually, can you direct people to a web shop, or do they have to sort of find that organically or through a newsletter?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's a few ways to skin that cat, as they say here in London. Terrible saying, but I think it describes. So one of the ways to do it is obviously interstitials. So that's the free way. You target your whales directly in your game. You advertise the presence of let's say you have this VIP web shop or somewhere where you have more larger value bundles that are exclusive to the web, higher price points. So if you have the ability to target your whales, I'd say interstitials are the best approach. But the fine line there is like Apple and Google, they don't allow you to directly bypass, obviously, the payment system within the mobile ecosystem. So you have to just inform them really more like, hey, check out our new web shop for some cool offers. So it's more like informing them rather than prompting them to buy that bundle directly in the game, but it's more telling them, go check out. You might even have some other features like a community page there or other features like that you can attract your players by targeting using interstitials. So that's where the performance is the best, but also retargeting on user acquisition. So if you're able to retarget some of your players that haven't maybe played in a while but have spent a lot of money in your game, so retargeting might be effective as well. Email, of course, blog, newsfeed, push notifications, etc. So I think those are good methods.
One thing that I guess when we were talking about this offline, off stage, you mentioned actually that a lot of the most engaged players are actually playing PC desktop versions of mobile games anyway, right? And so by providing a launcher, you're just kind of giving them an easier way to play on desktop while they're working. Is that the case?
Yeah, I mean, see what Tilting Point did, for example. They made a launcher for, I think, Warhammer and another game, and their partner. So they used a launcher just to, give their players, because they were using BlueStacks anyways to play on a desktop. And that's increasingly, especially for core games like 4X strategy games, most of the players just they just go with BlueStacks, and they anyways played on their desktop. So when you see that from your data, you should definitely consider like maybe it's a good idea to make a web version or a PC version of your game.
Is there such, I guess, one more question from me, is there such a thing as being too early to integrating third-party payments? When should you do it as a developer? Is it when you hit a sort of point where you need to scale more with your game?
That's a good question. I think it's definitely not a part of a launch strategy. I think if you do if you work as a mobile-first strategy, you need to focus on that, capture mobile, get the featurings, all of that. When you plateau your game in terms of scale, that you basically hit the plateau, that it's only scaling with incrementals, with UA. I think at that point when doing, like, for example, a PC web version or doing a web shop where you sell these goods, that's where you can actually see growth when you otherwise maybe plateaued it. And that's, I think, that's the kind of more like unlocking the next plateau, if you will. Yeah. Cool. So maybe I'm going to ask you a couple more questions, and this is like on the topic of when we look at the blockchain, NFTs, play-to-earn projects. So Robin, there's a lot of new forms of commerce rising in the gaming industry, like blockchain and NFTs, and in this conference there's a lot of talks about that. So for you, what's exciting for you as a developer when it comes to blockchain and NFTs and play-to-earn?
Yeah, so I should, as I mentioned earlier, we previously have been really focused on mobile free-to-play. We set out as a company to build very ambitious titles, basically online worlds that are very large in scale, can allow many users in the same space, you know, dynamic economies, all of that kind of stuff. We were trying to do that in mobile free-to-play, which was a little bit ambitious perhaps for the free-to-play market. You know, I think, I don't know if mobile free-to-play is pretty brutal to companies that are trying something new and trying innovation. So for us, we've just started looking at the Web3 space and how this kind of, what we're doing maps to it. And actually it feels like sort of the goalposts have moved in front of what we've been working on for so long, because we've always been working on things like shared spaces, persistent worlds, job economies, owning property, all things like that. And now this just provides the perfect sort of template to do it. I think what's exciting from a developer's perspective is the fact that it's a completely new frontier. So it's a new space, basically. So there's a lot of like challenges, there's a lot of questions, there's a lot of things we don't know, unlike free-to-play, which is obviously there's a lot of answers. So one of the most exciting things is simply the unknown and simply the opportunity, right? It's a completely new space, new audience, and it's kind of a new model as well. So, you know, if you think about the fact that previously we've had premium games where, you know, you pay your money, you get the game. We've had free-to-play games where, you know, it's all about keeping the most engaged users with you and monetizing them. I suppose we've had subscriptions. So the way I see it is basically play-to-earn is just another way of monetizing, basically.
Great, that helps a lot. So I think to follow up with that, like, what do you think are the challenges, like navigating? I mean, you know, before I went to the dark side on payments and publishing and all of that, I did actually develop mobile games as well, but that was like way back when
we worked together.
Yeah, we worked together at Rovio. Yeah, old colleagues. But you know, this was kind of the innocent days where monetization was a side show. It was like you're selling your games directly to operators, and you get a big chunk of money when you deliver a game, and there's no monetization inside the game. So it's a very different world. And like when I'm trying to like think how difficult it was to do the free-to-play transition for me, and now I look at like for a developer, like how hard it has to be to kind of try to now figure these things out. So like what are the challenges for you, like trying to just navigate this as a developer, just thinking about it like from your perspective, like what makes sense, what's confusing, what's just, yeah.
It's kind of like the same answer, right? Like the challenges are the same things that make the space so exciting from a developer's perspective, right? The fact that there's so much more room to fail, but at least, you know, and sort of learn the hard way, basically, that you're probably going to see a lot of projects that, you know, do it badly, right? And they mess up their economy, or you know, they lean too hard into the kind of speculative aspect of the game, and you know, that kind of has ramifications on the economy. I guess there's just so many ways it could go, but I think that's also, it's kind of like two sides of the same coin. That's also the thing that makes it so exciting. I think the issue, obviously, there's the main issue is one of perception. So obviously, there's an issue of perception, and not just with, you know, fans. We've obviously seen, you know, with Stalker 2 or the Team 17 or, you know, Sega, Ubisoft. There's always a backlash of fans, but also I think there's an issue with the perception from the perspective of a lot of developers as well. So yeah, I think that's something that really kind of we need to overcome as well. Is that a lot of developers just don't like it. And really, I think the way to kind of overcome that is to actually prove why it should exist, why it should, through providing compelling experiences, prove it. And actually, it does remind me of when we were both at Rovio in the early days of free to play, and the company had to transition from like being a premium company to a free to play company. And obviously, I won't talk about the inner goings on of Rovio, but it reminds me of that, right? Like, not everyone wanted to work for a free-to-play company, and it's kind of the same thing we're seeing now with kind of blockchain and NFTs and play to earn. There's also, of course, the environmental stuff, but I think that will probably go away. You've got with the sort of proof of stake consensus mechanisms that it'll prove that the environmental side of things isn't really an actual issue. It's more the sort of proof of work stuff that plays into that.
Wow, cool. Well, I think that's probably enough for the questions asking each other. I'd like to open up the opportunity for anybody in the audience to ask about these topics we just discussed, or ask us anything.
Literally ask you anything?
Anything.
Sure.
Sure.
I think you might regret that. Has anybody got any questions?
Ask him anything.
Christian.
Hi guys, great session so far. So just kind of expanding on monetization beyond the app stores. You mentioned a couple of the app stores there, but what about sort of alternative app stores, third party, whether that be products that you can, so for example, installs on preloads, or whether that be third-party engagement, promoting affiliates, etc. Could you give us a bit more on that?
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. I think the third-party, especially third-party Android stores, I think there's going to be an interesting future where if you look at the Android 12 setup and all of that, like Google is definitely more and more trying to make it easier for developers to sign their apps so that they're like, you can update them even if you install an app from a completely third-party store, or even the publisher's own store. So one thing I think I see in the future is like big publishers who create big franchises, they would essentially have their own store. And this is also a big topic as well with Apple and sideloading. So people are really strung up on the payment methods, but actually there's a whole conversation in between, for example, Netherlands, in Korea, Russia, in the US, even with Apple, is to allow sideloading. And what that means that you could basically create your own publisher app store, and you could own your customers directly. You could choose your payment methods directly. I mean, that would be paradise for publishers, really. Obviously, the issue with featuring, I think, these days, if you look at the distribution side, I think these third-party stores that exist now are actually, in a sense, more efficient in terms of distributing it regionally than these large app stores, like worldwide app stores. So I think the future is going to be more local, more regional, and also more self-control. So I think that what we have today for third-party app stores is a prelude to publisher app stores.
You heard it here first. Yeah. It's the Amazonization of app stores. Any more questions? Yep.
Hi. Do you ever see cases where, for example, the Apple Store would actually penalize apps for using these web stores?
Can you? I didn't catch you in the beginning. Yeah. One more time.
Yeah. Have you seen any cases where, like a app store or other stores would actually penalize you for building these web stores?
Basically penalize for you if you go outside of the App Store in the payments ecosystem. You get into trouble. Yeah, actually no, and that's the funny thing. Like, we have so many partners who've done it, and the platforms are aware that they are selling item bundles on a web shop, for example, and they're even using interstitials. And it seems that the platforms are aware of this, and they're not doing anything about it. And I think there's like two options in my head why, when you look at, for example, what Fortnite did, they did it very clearly that they didn't even allow Apple to be in the between, and that was kind of like almost like going to the barricades and like this is how we're gonna go, and they knew what would happen, right? But so I wouldn't suggest doing that. Obviously, that would probably fall very quickly. But I think overall, I think I've never seen any negative reaction. I think there maybe has been some cases where I've heard some people get like bumped down into featuring conversation a little bit, but you know, nothing really massive repercussions that I could at least I know of.
I guess Fortnite's actually now, you can play that on your iPhone as well, because it's on NVIDIA's platform.
It's on cloud, yeah. And I think that's the whole part of cloud gaming as well. Like, when you think about cloud gaming, I think the fact that these platforms are trying to hold on domination of the payments is just basically showing that they already know deep down that they're going to lose this whole thing. So they're trying to hold on it as long as they can, because future is going to be cloud and it's going to be screens, not platforms.
We talk about the future, but how close are we to it?
I think we're getting very close. I think the infrastructure, the internet infrastructure, 5G, satellite-based Web3 internet, I think what we are very close. The infrastructure is almost there to sustain true cloud gaming without any issues. Certainly for the developed world, but in order to be able to reach emerging markets, that's definitely still ways off. I think we will see in the next 5 years, we will start seeing products that really transcend platforms completely, that you don't even feel that you're really downloading the game. You just go on a website and start playing, whatever the device is. We will definitely see that in the Western world in the next couple of years. But I think for emerging markets, that's still a decade away. And just looking at the infrastructure, so that's something that needs to be, if you're thinking about this, you need to plan for that.
Do you think things like 5G are driving this up, this sort of edge technology is really sort of driving what's happening in the more developed countries, and we've got to wait for the emerging markets to sort of catch up before we've got that mass adoption?
Yeah.
How do we cross that chasm, do you think, Miikka?
I think in the West, yeah, I think the emerging markets, the struggle for emerging markets is really actually a struggle of finding ways to pay. Because, you know, many emerging markets don't accept international credit cards. People don't have access to PayPal, etc. So and access to devices. So that is actually something that, you know, we are working a lot actually on the local level on enabling people to pay with alternative payment methods, like use their direct local bank to pay in a game. Even not going in the ATM, you can pay to your favorite game. You can get more virtual currency, and that's something that that access level actually in ways is already ahead of Western world, which is funny. So I think there's some things where the emerging markets are more innovative out of necessity, especially on the payment side, and then in the West, the internet infrastructure, I think that's where, but it'll take some time until both kind of come to a delta point where it will be a conflection point, and we will see like true lack of platforms, and it's more screens where you play the games. And
this in turn will affect the user acquisition structures, and then probably the entire model will change, like once again.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, that's cool. Any more questions for the dudes? No? Okay, well, I want to say a big thank you to you folks. You've been absolutely amazing. Give them a round of applause, please.